Another video in a series of how to upgrade old models by making simple modifications and improvements. This one covers TTA tanks made by Hornby, I think, from the 1980s onwards. I purchased 4 of these BP Chemicals tank wagons for my son's layout about 25 years ago. The detailing may be a little crude by today's standards, and the chassis and underframes look a little heavy. Shiny black plastic and white-walled wheels complete the toy-like look. The printed letters and logos look rather garish and perhaps are not as clearly defined as today's offering. However, the models have walkways on tops of the tanks and steps at the ends which look good, so these will be retained, not replaced. Improvements will therefore be limited to repainting, adding new transfers and gently weathering the finished wagons. My layout is based on Par in Cornwall, and BP Chemicals tanks were not seen there. However, TTA tanks were, as they carried diesel fuel to the Long Rock maintenance depot at Penzance. My tanks will therefore be reliveried accordingly. The model was first of all taken apart, and this shot shows the various components. The tank body is a push fit on the chassis and is secured by 4 lugs. When removing the body, gently push in the 2 lugs at one end and the body will lift off. The tank is in 2 halves which come apart easily. The chassis was given a coat of light grey primer. I used a Halford's rattle can grey, which is easy to spray and takes enamel paints well. The sole bars were picked out in red, as I wanted my tanks to look like those owned by Esso. The underframe was brush painted brown. I used Humbrol enamels numbers 53, 82 and 32 in the ratio of 3 to 3 to 5. The number 53 gunmetal has metallic particles in it, and I use it to add a bit of texture to the underframes. Whilst the brown was still wet, black paint was added to certain areas such as axle boxes to simulate oil staining. Attention then turned to the tank body. I decided not to try and remove the Hornby printed lettering, but merely to paint over them. I figured that trying to remove the lettering would probably spoil the finish of the tanks, and hoped that just by overspraying I could get a better result. A primer coat of Halford's rattle can grey was sprayed on and covered the words and signs quite well. I was going to leave it like that, but the grey colour did not look quite right. I looked at lots of photos of the real tank wagons and decided that a dove grey colour might be more suitable. The good news was that there was a matte spray primer available in dove grey from a company called Motip, so I purchased one. The bad news was that it didn't cover very well. This was especially true on the lower parts of the tanks, where they joined the chassis. In the end, I sprayed 5 coats onto the bodies and then gave up. The colour looked about right, and hopefully transfers and weathering will disguise where the paint is a little thin. Transfers need to be applied to the sides and across the joins at the ends, so I left the tanks in one piece. With the benefit of hindsight, it would have saved time to split the tanks into halves, apply the side transfers and then reassemble them before applying the numbers at the ends. Hey ho. I use the excellent Railtech transfers, doing one side at a time and then leaving them overnight to thoroughly dry out. They were then sprayed with rail match matte varnish to seal them to the sides of the tanks. There are 20 transfers per wagon, and applying them properly is a very time-consuming task. But take your time, don't rush, and ensure the transfers are as level as possible. The end results will be worth it. Railtech transfers are excellent, and the completed tank sides compare very favourably with modern ready-to-run stock. Hornby supply a weight with the tanks, and this was glued to the chassis at this stage. However, I like my wagons heavier than Hornby do, so an extra weight was glued into the tank halves before they were reassembled. The wagons looked good at this stage, and it almost seemed a pity to weather them, but they would never have stayed this clean in real life, so it was out with the airbrush again. The first stage was vertical spraying to show oil spillage from the tank fillers running down the sides of the tanks. This was followed by gently airbrushing the whole of the sides and ends of the models. A higher concentration of paint was sprayed on the lower sides and chassis to simulate dirt and grime picked up in normal traffic. As always with weathering, restraint is the key. Less is invariably more. I am not a fan of plastic wheels, so I bought some metal replacements from Peter's Spares. These are shiny and were painted in the same dirty brown colour as the underframes and look much better for it. If you do decide to retain the Hornby plastic wheels, they can also be much improved by painting and covering up the ghastly white rims. The roof walkways and end steps were dirted at this stage and fitted to the wagon. One of the finished wagons posing for its official photo. And here they are, on the layout pastiche. Simple repainting and rewheeling have, I think, transformed this model. The lack of fine detail does not notice when the tanks are in service on the layout. Not bad for a model over 25 years old. The completed rake of 4 wagons running through pastiche, hauled by a suitably grubby Bachmann Class 08. The only items I purchased for these improvements were wheels, transfers and paint. The wheels worked out at £3 per wagon, the transfers £2 and paint probably about £2. Total per wagon about £7. I reckon it was money well spent. That's all for now. See you next time.